Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And as they say on the old television show Monty Python, and now for something completely different. I'm Jim Harkness, the president of the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, and I'd first just like to thank our hosts, the Greens, for convening this discussion today. I think it's a extremely important topic, and I'm very interested to learn the ideas that people have for how the EU can address the issue of land grabbing. The speed and scale of land acquisitions in the Global South since the 2007-2008 food price crisis has been alarming, and I think to the extent that this does constitute a threat to food security and farmers, it needs to be addressed. At the Institute of Agriculture and Trade Policy, we have found that the trend toward rapid consolidation of land ownership and control is in fact an even more widespread phenomenon than just being limited to Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America as it's normally seen. And to illustrate this and point toward some of the larger issues that we think need to be addressed if we want to put a stop to land grabbing, I want to talk about what's happening to farmland in the United States and in China. And of course, these are generally countries that are thought of as being on the demand side or on the grabbing side of the equation. The history of the United States is, of course, truly a history of land grabbing, and land grabbing on a continental scale, starting at the end of the 16th century right up until the beginning of the 20th. This is an example of U.S. land grabbing in 1893, something that was commonly referred to at the time as the Oklahoma Land Rush. On September 16th of that year, thousands of European settlers lined up to take over a substantial piece of land that had belonged to the Cherokee Nation, land that was known as the Cherokee Outlet. As you can see, this was a dusty and dry place. It was part of the old Chisholm Trail, where large cattle herds traveled to the big rail towns to be shipped to Chicago. A few decades later, oil was discovered on much of the Cherokee land that had been taken. And I think this should be a reminder to us that throughout history and today, land grabs are not just about farmland, but they're also about what lies underneath it, whether it's oil, gas, water, or minerals. Today, in the states that make up the agricultural heartland of the U.S., land prices are skyrocketing, giving rise to concerns that we could witness a repeat of the U.S. housing bubble and financial collapse that followed in 2008. The first warning that something might be wrong with farmland prices came from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, which insures bank depositors against bank failures. In a 2009 report, the FDIC cautioned bankers about the possibility of becoming overextended on agricultural land loans. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. cropland values have soared more than 40% since 2004. Cropland values, in fact, are rising at twice the rate of what farmers pay to rent farmland, which means that there's something other than farming driving up these prices. Here's what the farmland price run-up looks like for the past 50 years, from under $500 an acre to over $2,000 an acre. The Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City blamed this recent price increase on low interest rates combined with record high grain prices and the perception that farmland is a safe haven for diversifying investments. The danger is that either a drop in grain prices or an increase in interest rates could lead to a large drop in the value of farmland. The effect of this would be to force more farmers off the land, and as they go underwater on mortgages, leading to further consolidation of this farmland. To understand how serious this threat is, we only need to look at what happened the last time land prices went up dramatically, the period from 1970 to 1990. In 1970, we had almost 10 million farmers in the United States, but by 1990, we had fewer than 3 million. In 20 years, we lost close to 7 million farmers in the United States, and that's what I call a land grab. Now, we don't have 7 million farmers left to lose this time around, and even a small increase in interest rates or a decrease in commodity prices could put many, if not all, of our remaining medium-sized family farmers off of the land. leaving the U.S. with only a relatively small number of immensely large farms. Now, in the U.S., we're approaching what looks like just another in a long series of land grabs. In China, the grabbing is already underway, and it's going on a massive scale. These are farmers from Wukan village in Guangdong province. Their land was sold from out from under them by the local government. And so they took to the streets by the thousands, fighting the local police to a standstill and eventually securing at least a temporary reprieve. From 1996 to 2007, about 8.3 million hectares of arable land in China was appropriated or converted to non-agricultural uses, either by local governments or outside investors. An even larger area, approximately 14 million additional hectares, has been transferred out of the hands of the peasants who controlled it since the post-Mao return to family farming to other producers. Officially, the second type of transfer is legal and voluntary, intended to allow cultivation at a larger, more efficient scale by more efficient producers. But there are serious questions as to how voluntary the transfers were, whether the new farm operations can meet both profitability and food security goals, and just how much the original landholders benefit. The issue in China, of course, is not just the land area involved. China's rural population density is much, much higher than that in Africa or in Latin America. So the number of people displaced from a given area where rights are transferred is also much greater. Economist He Qinglian has estimated that conversion of farmland to other uses in China, that first category I mentioned, has amounted to a displacement of approximately 78 million peasants over the past 10 years. Not all of this expropriation is involuntary, but much of it is. The Chinese government keeps track of, and at times even reports publicly, the number of large protests that occur each year. Since 2006, that number has doubled to 180,000 per year. And that's not 180,000 people participating. It's 180,000 separate incidents. In 2007, a government researcher reported that half of all petitions for redress to central authorities were from peasants angry about land expropriation. The official justification for land grabbing in China, as in many places, is agriculture and rural development. There is both the agriculture investment and scale efficiency argument, and the notion that by promoting urbanization, the government is reducing the urban-rural income gap. This latter rationale is, of course, especially convenient in that it justifies real estate development as the follow-up to take up arable land. But the central government has also recognized that much of what is happening is either opposed so strongly at the local level that it can't go forward, or is in conflict with other state priorities, such as the preservation of scarce farmland. In such cases, land grabbing is officially ascribed to corruption at the local level. But both of these explanations obscure an important systemic source of this problem. In 1994, China reformed its taxation system, replacing a redistributive fiscal transfer arrangement that was designed to reduce regional inequalities with a system in which every level of government is held responsible for generating its own revenues for public service provision. Local governments, which are responsible for about 70% of total government expenditures in China, were restricted from using some of the more lucrative forms of taxation and have turned to long-term land leases as a major new source of revenue to cover regular budgetary costs. From 2006 to 2010, governments in China raised over $1 trillion from land transfers. And in 2010, approximately 40% of local government revenue in China came from what is now referred to as land financing. This massive sell-off of public resources has gone all but unnoticed outside of the country, but its impacts should be felt soon enough. China's remarkable, if very difficult to implement, food self-sufficiency policies, which enable it to feed 22% of the world's population on 9% of the world's arable land without massive imports, are now in grave danger. In the 1990s, the government declared that in order for China to feed itself, the country's farmland should not shrink below 120 million hectares. That red line has probably already been crossed, and much of the remaining farmland is now under contract to larger agribusinesses growing cash crops for export, meaning there are fewer people growing their own food and there's less food being produced for domestic consumption. During the food price crisis of 2007 and 2008, China was often blamed for contributing to high global prices due to its economic growth and changing diets, a charge that was false at the time precisely because of the country's effective food self-sufficiency policies. If internal land grabs in China today imperil those very policies and China turns to international markets to meet domestic demand, global food prices will continue upward and the incentive for land grabs around the world will increase. These U.S. and China examples, although they sound quite different and certainly are, illustrate a couple of points. First, that there is a dangerous concentration of land ownership occurring even outside of Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Second, the degree to which finance, and not simply demand for food, is driving these processes. And third, the ways in which food security arguments are used as an excuse for land concentration, which in turn undermines food security, necessitating or rationalizing yet further concentration of land holdings. But even adding the U.S. and China to this global land grab picture is not enough. For land grabs are really just one expression of a larger threat. The global rush by corporations and banks to control and generate profit from land, food, and water. 3 decades of trade and investment deals have created the legal infrastructure for this planet grab, and the realities of environmental crises and hunger have provided it with a pretext. So while I look forward to hearing more about some concrete actions that the EU could take on the ground to resist land grabs, such as strengthening land rights for peasants and indigenous peoples, I think we also need to consider how to attack those deeper financial drivers and the intellectual rationale behind this phenomenon. One step certainly would be to put to rest the notion that large-scale, high-input farming is the only way to feed the world. This idea, which, let's keep in mind, began as a marketing slogan for an American grain company, provides both moral cover and a veneer of scientific authority to land grabs. It's been, I think, convincingly debunked by both academic assessments and by a growing body of successful farming experiences in both developing and developed countries. But the policies, research budgets, and ethos of government agricultural agencies and international organizations are still unduly influenced by the agrochemical industries and the models of agricultural development that were shown to be so bankrupt during the food price crisis. A reorientation toward farmer-centered agroecological approaches is long overdue. And I think we're fortunate to have the Special Rapporteur on the right to food as an articulate champion in this regard. Secondly, we don't necessarily think of stopping land grabs as a primary reason for re-regulation of the finance industry, but I think we should for several reasons. First, high and unstable food prices are one incentive for land grabs. The volatility of other markets, second, the volatility of other markets leads investors to seek stability or profit in land. And third, volatile land prices, with their booms and busts, contribute further to the concentration of holdings. There's ample evidence that global food price volatility, as well as land price bubbles, are driven in large part by excessive speculation. Measures such as financial transaction tax, a ban on over-the-counter trading or dark markets, and strong position limits would all help bring greater stability and transparency to markets so that they can function properly to support agricultural development. This would increase the likelihood as well that investments in farmland, which are needed, would be for farming and not for speculative flipping or hedging. Thanks again to our hosts for the opportunity to participate in this conversation. I'm encouraged to see that the Greens recognize the global nature of this problem, and I look forward to hearing more about better ways to promote genuine rural development and food security and human rights. Thank you.